Our IOC today is based off of John Donne's Holy Sonnet 1.
Yeah. The main theme of the poem actually has to do with how the Christian soul has found and is caught between his sin and his salvation, and also his temptation.
Even though we don't know Donne's religion in this poem before we've analyzed this, we still see that he's struggling between salvation and temptation within this poem. And Donne's stylistic choices of personification, the use of sound devices, and syntax develop this desperate plea for God's salvation. He uses many different stylistic choices to make it very obvious that Donne is pleading for his salvation. And in Donne's plea to God, he personifies the things that tempt him to show that sin has encompassed his body and he needs salvation.
Okay, well, our first air score was a personification, and this also helps tie into the metaphysical poet who Donne is. He takes these concepts as death, sin, and despair, and he personifies them into beings that he has to interact with on a daily basis. And the first one he personifies in his poem is despair, and he uses the line despair behind. He gives it a place as if it's always catching up with him, it's always searching for him. Next, he uses death, and the quote from the poem would be, "I run to death, and death meets to me as fast."
And that's in line 3.
And in the line, he has alliteration that ties it together, and it helps bring about the effect of death. And also, it's personified because death is capitalized. It's given the effect of being a person who Donne has to avoid, someone who's chasing him, such as a predator, also. And devil, and the personification of the devil is noticeable in the old subtle foe who Donne has to face throughout his life. Donne has to avoid the devil because he understands that his sin is leading him towards him. And also, hell, if you look at the poem through a sense of place, hell is supposed to be underneath him while heaven is above, who he's fleeing towards. And there's a devil in hell that is underneath him, and then death is in front and despair is behind. And he is trapped by the trifecta, devil, death, and despair, that attempts to capture him. And this was the effect, the personification is the effect, that Donne needs God and he looks to look above for him. Since the personification gives these three people who he's trying to avoid a position and forces him to look above for his salvation.
Okay, and then our second area of support is our sound devices. John Donne, he uses the sound devices in a skillful manner to emphasize despair and death and create kind of a sense of foreboding for the reader. And something that's really noticeable is the alliteration of D and F, which kind of create a dreary tone, I guess. The words all have negative connotations, such as I run to death and I dare not move my dim eyes anyway, despair behind and death before doth pass. And then there's also alliteration in F, feeble flesh. It pretty much conveys the narrator's sense of urgency and that despair, and it kind of ties into the personification that Cardell was talking about earlier with bringing out the imagery by personifying death and despair. And there's also assonance, which kind of contrasts in the last couplet. Thy grace may wean me to present his art, the grace and may, and then draw mine iron heart. It contrasts between a more secure and a conflicted tone in the last two lines, and it also brings out a sense of euphony and cacophony that completely ties in with the whole atmospheric foreboding. And then similar sound devices serve to kind of bring out the main theme through the just overall tone and atmosphere. This, coupled with the syntax, subtly brings out the message for the reader.
Donne uses the classical structure of the sonnet, and he uses it beautifully and he enhances it through the use of caesuras. Donne basically makes this the traditional couplet, but what we see is he actually does use some visual rhymes and mixed with some actual rhymes, such as the first line and the fourth and fifth line are all rhyme scheme lines. They rhyme with each other, decay, yesterday, and way. And most of these have a positive connotation along with them, actually the actual rhymes, he speaks of God and pleasures, such as in line 4 he says, and all my pleasures are like yesterday. And these show that he's kind of, since the rhyming provides a sense of pleasure when you're hearing it, it's almost as if he's showing that this is what he's pleading for, these are the things he wants. In lines 2 and 3, there is a visual rhyme of haste and fast that says, these are lines rhyme B and B, and they are both visual rhymes, but he speaks of, repair me now from mine and doth haste. I run to death and death me stands fast, and he's speaking of things with a negative connotation, and the pleas, basically all the sin that has tempted him, and he's trying to move away from them, which emphasizes why he chose to use visual rhymes in these lines instead. Donne also continues with a classical structure by using an ending couplet at the very last 2 lines, which both are rhymed together, and the lines are, thy grace may wing me to prevent his art, and thou like adamant draw mine iron heart. And these are really significant lines to the entire poem, which is common within sonnets. And he's making basically a reference to God, and he's asking, he doesn't want to sin, and he's asking to draw his iron heart to bring out the sin from him and to ask for salvation. And these are really important, significant to the rest of the poem, because they bring all of it together in the ending. And they also are enhanced, just like earlier Aaron was saying, with the sound devices, because these are both rhymed, and also there are different lines in here that actually contain the accents for the poem, such as grace may and mine iron. And we also find many caesuras within this poem. For example, at most of the ends of the lines are either semicolons or colons, and this kind of adds dramatic effect, and it's pleading and it shows that Donne is basically pleading his case, because he's taking breaks and he's taking pauses to think about his sins and reflect over the bad choices he's made, and he's asking for salvation.
The plea for salvation is very noticeable and is developed very well in this poem through his use of alliteration, actually overall sound devices, the structure, including caesura, and the structure of the sonnet, and also the personification of death, despair, and the devil. The human struggle is very universal in this poem, and is noticeable because all Christians should understand this feels, to be caught between your basic nature and your basic, motivation to sin and your desire to satisfy these physical pleasures, while also looking ahead towards God and asking for salvation. This is all noticeable in Holy Sonnet number 1 by John Donne.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
It is recording. Oh.
So this is our GOC actually, for Holy Sonnet 1 by John Donne. My name is Hannah Rafiq.
Hello, Henry.
Aaron Way.
And we are in Miss Yeager's class for period. Wow.
Okay.
Okay, that was bad. Miss Yeager, should we introduce ourselves?
Okay, yeah, and to sum it all up, through Donne's usage of stylistic devices and overall figurative language, readers see his desperate plea to be free from sin and to receive salvation from God. And
It's our final conclusion is it's poems about the human struggle between finding salvation and resisting the temptation every day that's around us to go and follow our basic instincts. Then shows the universality of this struggle through his use of stylistic devices to develop his plea in Holy Sonnet number 1.